One of the most common topics discussed amongst retirees is whether they should sell the family home once the children have left the house and downsize. There's a lot of good information about this, by the way, but the thinking is that the cost of utilities will go down, the cost of insurance will go down, property taxes will go down, and maintenance and upkeep will also go down. In this video, we're going to talk about both sides of the discussion and give you more information so that you can make a more informed decision. The first point is that people think, and history has proved this to be true in the short term, that at points in time you're at the top of the market and you're better off selling at the top than at another point in time. That's obvious, of course, but what is the top of the market? If you were sitting in your home in November of 2007 and you had a median valued home, that home would have been valued at approximately $249,000. Fast forward to October of 2010, it would have crashed to $204,000, so it would have gone down $45,000. That's a big move, and you would be kicking yourself in 2010 for not selling it back in 2007, more than likely. But what's really interesting, though, is the definition of top of the market. Top of the market implies that things are going to go down and they're never going to come back. At least that's what most people think. But the fact is, if you sold that same house in January of 2024, it would have been valued at $420,000. And if we look forward to the future, it's very likely that there will be another top of the market and then another. And in fact, it's entirely possible that the future top of the market will make today's top of the market look like the bottom of the market. All you need is time in most cases. But how much time? In some cases, we're talking about decades. 2010 to 2024 is a long time to wait for your house to come back, particularly if you're in retirement. So the question of whether this is the right time to sell your home or not is a relative one, because there are some really good reasons to sell your home sooner rather than later, including the price, of course. Have you had a change in your family status? For example, have you had someone who's passed recently? Owning a home is not just a financial asset, it's also an emotional one for people because there are memories attached to that home. The deeper the memory, the harder it is to sell the home, of course. Did you receive the home through an inheritance? If so, there might be factors around that home that actually don't really apply to you personally. For many people, keeping the inherited home is far less practical than even keeping the primary residence. Are you going through a divorce? If you're transforming one home into two, and frankly, dividing one income into two, owning that home may just be impractical. Many retirees make the decision to leave their home for greener pastures, better weather, a more active lifestyle, and frankly, maintaining two homes is just not practical. It's just way too expensive. Next, they just can't afford the home anymore. People buy big homes that they can barely afford when they're growing in their lives and in their careers. But at the end of that time, sometimes you just can't afford to maintain that house. The mantra used to be, buy the biggest home you can afford, even something bigger than you can afford, because your income is going to grow into it. I'm not sure if that's ever good advice, but certainly it's better advice for someone in their 20s, 30s, and maybe even 40s than someone in their 50s or 60s who now has to maintain that home that they could barely afford for the first half of their lives. This also means that when it's time to step out of the workforce, this home could create a liability that a retiree just cannot afford. But the decision to sell is two-sided. There are also bad reasons to sell. The rationale that this is the top of the market is equally important when this may not be the top of the market. With interest rates coming down in the future, one could expect home values to continue to increase, although you don't really know for sure. Even property developers don't know, and these are people who are experts at what they do. It's incredibly hard to make a call like that with any asset, really. Think about Bitcoin. Everybody thought it was going to $100,000 a coin, and then it peaked and came crashing down, and now it's halfway back up again. The same could be said about a lot of assets. The fact is, asset prices are driven by supply and demand, and if you don't have a lot of demand, then the price is going to come down. If you have more demand, the price is going to go up. This also means that trying to make a call whether you're at the top or not also means that you could be leaving a big surge behind. Of course, even if you're at the top of the market, there are reasons why selling might not make sense, and that is home prices in terms of size vary in terms of how fast they grow. For example, recently home prices here in New York haven't kept up large home prices haven't kept up with the surge in small home prices. So if you owned a large home, you would be selling at a price that would not be too dissimilar from the home that you're going to buy. Rarely do buyers sell at the top of the market for a large home and buy at the bottom of the market for a small home at the same time, or roughly the same time. This is possible, potentially anyway, if you're switching jurisdictions, if you're moving from, say, Florida to New York, but it's less likely if you're moving from New York to New York. You also need to deal with selling costs, hassle costs, and moving costs. And frankly, once you get through all of that, then you have the capital gains issue. If you're married, the first $500,000 of capital gains is not taxed. If you're single, the first $250,000 of capital gains is not taxed. So what do? Well, there are non-monetary reasons to consider. The first is, have your children moved? Many parents follow their children so that they can be around their kids and their grandkids. Now, assuming that you don't have to make a split decision with one child going one way, one child going the other, and the location of your kids is crystal clear, then it really comes down to if you want to follow your kids, if you have the financial means to follow your kids, and also if you can expect them to come back or not, because that is a big decision. If they decide to go away for training for a year or two, but you know that they're eventually going to make it back home, well, that might not be the best reason to sell your house. Conversely, if your family is all here, you might find it very difficult to just pack up and leave. This is particularly true if you have an elderly parent, a child that has special needs, or your entire social network is here and only here. This is particularly true if you live in a small town and you have generational relationships of family, friends that go back 50, 60, 70 years or more. Family friends that your parents knew and your grandparents knew as well are now your friends. And of course, if there are things that you can only do in a certain location, your current location or another location, it might make a lot of sense based on that desire. For example, if you live here in New York and you have season tickets to the Mets and your whole life is around the Mets, believe it or not, there are a lot of people that their whole life is around a sports team, then they would have a hard time leaving New York. So there's a lot to consider, of course, but the bottom line is it's a complicated decision. It's not an easy one. There are financial reasons for and against. There are non-financial reasons for and against. And you need to decide what is most important among all of that and then come to a landing from there. This is Jeff Schmidt. Thanks for watching.
Holy Schmidt!